Witch in Charm's Way, a cozy mystery audiobook, written and narrated by R.K. Dreaming. Part 23. "What are you two whispering about?" demanded Uncle Ghastly sharply. I groaned inwardly. The last thing I needed was for Granny to find out that I had got myself wrapped up in a murder. Then this family gathering might turn into the explosion that I feared. I turned to face my awful uncle. "Hello, Uncle Radagast," I said mildly. "So you're back, are you?" he said, snidely. "Don't let him goad you, Esme," I told myself. Ignoring him, I turned to face the rest of my many uncles and aunts and cousins in the room, who greeted me with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Last, I faced a stranger, a striking woman with very pale blonde hair and sharp grey eyes who looked around my age. "This is Pearl," said Allegra, Uncle Radagast's fiancée. Allegra and I exchanged a quick glance and bit our lips, trying not to laugh. She had almost called him Uncle Ghastly in public. That would not have gone down well. Pearl's brow crinkled ever so slightly, as if she thought we might both be laughing about her. But she only said, "How lovely to finally meet you." "You too," I said politely. Allegra had said she feared Pearl was much more interested in marrying the family fortune than in marrying Uncle Ghastly, and I could see why. Pearl was at least 20 years younger than my horrid uncle, and 100 times more attractive. As I went over to take a seat next to my mum, Pearl inquired, "I hear you've been married recently. Congratulations. Is your husband not with you?" I almost groaned out loud. Trust the stranger in our midst to bring up this uncomfortable topic. "He's busy with work," I said, in no mood to explain the sorry state of my recent marriage. "Busy with his gambling," said Uncle Radagast with a sneer. My resolution to stay calm crumbled. I glared at him. "You don't know what you're talking about," I snapped. He looked shocked, and then his chest puffed out like an angry griffin. "Nobody in my family speaks to me like that," he roared. I glared back at him, my heart seeming to drum in my ears. I had long forgotten how it felt to be bullied by the horrid man who, as Granny Selma's eldest child, considered himself the next family patriarch. Well, if he thought I was the same timid child, he was very much mistaken. I was about to roar back at him that nobody spoke to me like that these days either. But Mum clutched my hand and gave me a frightened look. She was desperate for me not to start an argument. I noticed the silence that had fallen in the room. Clearly, no one challenged Uncle Ghastly like I just had, not even these days. I took a deep breath to calm myself, but glared at Uncle Ghastly long and hard. If he provoked me again, he would find that I was no longer the scared teenager who had walked out of this house. He seemed a little astonished at my reaction, and then he looked away. From the corner of the room came a prolonged little cackle from my great-aunt Tabitha, Granny's younger sister. She peered at me and seemed to like what she saw because she chuckled again. "You don't want to play with little dragons, Radagast," she said to her nephew, "or you might get burned." I grinned at her. Unless I was very much mistaken, she had just called me a little dragon. Uncle Radagast looked very sour about this. My heart, which had been pounding, calmed down. Hopefully that was the worst of the family politics over with for tonight. Pearl broke the silence. "I was so looking forward to seeing your magic wild hair," she said. "I heard it was a lovely pink." "It is," Mum said proudly. She turned to me. "Do you want me to change it back now that you're home?" she said, looking hopeful. I shook my head. "Not now, Mum." "How lovely to have a magic wild bloodline in the family," said Pearl, with a simpering smile. "I heard that when you were a little baby, you climbed out of the window on the top floor and fell all the way down into the garden, and you bounced like a ball all over the lawn, chortling with glee, and bounced right onto the lake water and kept bouncing. All over the water. That must have been such a sight." "What?" I asked in astonishment. I had never heard this story. Little babies didn't go bouncing around like that. Not without a crazy ton of magic. I smirked a bit at my mum, sure that Pearl must have heard this story from someone in town. All my life the local people had liked to make up stories about the amazing pink-haired magic wild baby. I was shocked to hear they were still talking about those stories now. But Mum was nodding. "No, I didn't," I said. "You did," she said. "You had just started crawling back then, and Domino only left you in the nursery for one moment, but you crawled out of your crib and went for an adventure out of the window. My heart nearly stopped when I saw you bouncing around the garden." She put her hand on her heart and smiled fondly. "And when I came out to get you off the lake, you refused to come. I had to threaten you with my wand before you listened, and then you bounced right over to me. You were the most adorable little thing." She stroked my hair fondly. "But I never had that much magic," I protested. "You did," said Granny Selma shortly, "and now you don't, so what's the point in talking about it?" She glared at Mum. But for once Mum, who was always such an obedient daughter, refused to back down. She beamed at me. "You had so much magic we had to make you an amulet to hide it from people," she assured me. "Really? Why?" "Why do you think?" said Aunt Tabby. "People like those Hardwicks were bound to get jealous and try to do you harm." But what happened to my magic?" I said. My head was still spinning. I had thought I'd never had much magic. I never knew about this. "It went," said Granny Selma shortly, in such a tone of finality that even Aunt Tabby didn't dare disobey her. "But how?" I insisted. "You tell me," said Granny, looking thoroughly annoyed. I had nothing to say to that. I sat there quietly making chit-chat with Mum and Allegra for a while, and the family resumed talking about their usual gossip, with a lot of grumbling about the new mayor. The talk soon turned to the murder. "I heard that you found the body, Esme," said my Aunt Narcissa suddenly. Granny Selma's sharp eyes immediately zoomed in on me. "What? You found the body?" she demanded. I nodded. The cat really was out of the bag now. Mum gave a cry of shock. I reached out to pat her hand. "It's all right, Mum. The killer was long gone." "But what were you doing there?" Granny Selma demanded. "We heard the body was found in the gardens of Brimstone Castle." I nodded. "That's where I'm staying." Granny stiffened. She glared at me, so astonished by this shocking piece of treacherous news that she did not know what to say to me. Another cackle came from Aunt Tabby. "I knew it," she said in a sing-song voice. "I knew that Adele would leave Brimstone Castle to one of our girls." She reached across to pat Granny Selma's hand. "See? She always was loyal to her family after all, and now we have the castle back. Ha!" There was a collective gasp of shock from all around the room, and everyone stared at me. Everyone except Allegra, Viv, and Fluffy, who already knew. "You!" said Uncle Radagast angrily. "She left it to you?" There was sheer contempt and disbelief in his voice. I nodded. "She left it to me," I said calmly, and I smiled at him, smugly. "I can't believe it," said my cousin Cora, who was Uncle Ghastly's daughter. "Why did she leave it to you, Esme? You haven't even lived here in nearly 20 years. It's not fair." She cut herself off sharply, and she exchanged a quick glance with her twin sister Coco, then said, "Actually, I'd rather it was you, of course, than one of the Hardwicks." "Congratulations," said Coco. "That's wonderful news." "Thanks," I said dryly, fully aware that the twins were secretly seething. It wasn't really their fault. They had their own desires to win the family quest hanging over them, and thought that me owning the castle might give me an edge over them. "I think it's fabulous," said Allegra. "It's really good news, isn't it, Granny Selma, that the castle is back in the family fold?" Granny looked torn. The castle was a symbol of her sister Adele's betrayal, and yet the castle was something that the Brimstones and Hardwicks had fought to possess for centuries. It being back in Westbrim hands was definitely a boon for the family. It gave Granny one over on her nemesis Lavinia Hardwick. This news should have made her happy, but she clearly had ambiguous feelings about it. Finally she nodded. "I suppose it is good news." "Wonderful," said Aunt Tabby. "I'm glad you've agreed to that, Selma. Perhaps we ought to pop by and visit Adele one of these days. Put past issues behind us. Let bygones be bygones." Granny Selma looked at Aunt Tabby with an expression of horror, mixed with something else I could not read. Grief, maybe. Clearly she had not known that Aunt Adele was still around. "What?" she said. Great Aunt Tabby nodded, a smile playing on her lips. She had never been afraid of her big sister, not like the rest of us. "Adele's a poltergeist now," she confirmed, "and still making those delicious cakes of hers. I've heard she's reopened the Castle Café. We should go in and get a slice one of these days. I know you've missed her cakes." "I most certainly have not," said Granny Selma angrily, her tone indicating that this was the end of the conversation. I felt relieved. It was good the cat was out of the bag, and it hadn't gone down too badly. I thought I had gotten away with it when Granny Selma said to me, "You shall move back into Willow Manor immediately. I will tell Fraser to prepare your old room." Mum looked relieved. She looked at me pleadingly, knowing how stubborn I was. "I don't feel right having you over there," she said, "and there's been a murder on the property. Why don't you do what Granny says, love?" I shook my head firmly. "The police have got the murder in hand. They're investigating," I said. "I don't feel unsafe there, and anyway, Aunt Adele has reassured me that the 7 ghosts keep a very strict eye on the place." This was not exactly true, given our recent break-ins, but I knew that this would shut them up for good. The 7 ghosts were legendary, and more than a little ominous. I saw Cora shudder a little at my mention of them. "Not close enough," said Granny Selma acidly, "or there wouldn't have been a murder about the place. And I don't trust that Hawk Hardwick to solve it either, not one bit. No nephew of Lavinia's ever cared for us Westbrims. I bet Lavinia Hardwick is loving this," she added sourly. I did not comment. Granny Selma looked at me shrewdly. "And don't you think I don't know all about your last little misadventure?" she said. The bite in her tone let me know she was referring to my previous accusation of murder. I couldn't believe it. How had she found out? My mouth dropped open. I immediately snapped it shut, because Viv and Coco and Cora and all of my uncles and aunts were looking at me with great interest. Granny had been purposefully cryptic, and no one dared to question her except Aunt Narcissa. "Misadventure?" she said, her eyes gleaming. Surely you don't mean that Esme was— Be quiet, Narcissa, snapped Granny. Aunt Narcissa fell into a resentful silence. I snuck a quick glance at Allegra, who gave me the tiniest shrugs as if to say that she had no idea how Granny knew. Fortunately, Granny started complaining about Lavinia Hardwick again, and this distracted everyone. I let them chat about the murder amongst themselves, and did not let on that I knew anything about it. Mum would only panic. Knowing this, Allegra came to sit with me and Mum, and she expertly turned the conversation towards fluffiness recipes for the winter festive season. Aunt Circe quickly took up her lead. After I had determined that I'd spent enough time listening to the chit-chat in the grown-ups' lounge, Allegra, Viv, Fluffy and I made our escape into the kids' lounge. This had been our domain when we were younger, but now I supposed it was the domain of the new batch. There were fewer kids in the younger generation of the family, much to Granny Salma's disappointment. We found just 5 of them in the kids' lounge. "Sprogs," said Viv loudly as we entered. "We have arrived. Come and greet your elders and betters." 14-year-old Begonia and 10-year-old Herb did not look much impressed at this. But 4-year-olds Rory and Gaia ran forward to give us all adorable hugs. I was so excited to see them, and dispensed Aunt Adele's truffles to them, much to their glee. The little cuties soon filled their cheeks with them. I gave a cry of delight as I spotted little baby Luna. Our poltergeist nanny Domino greeted me cheerily and plopped the baby into my arms immediately. Baby Luna took one look at my face and her lower lip wobbled. I cooed at her, but she stubbornly screwed up her face, threatening to cry. She was no fool. She knew I was a stranger. Defeated for now, but determined to try again later, I handed her back to Domino before she started wailing. The rest of the evening in the family home was far more pleasant than I had expected. It was lovely, in fact. We enjoyed the many teas and nibbles and cakes brought to us by Miles the poltergeist, who crafted excellent culinary creations. My favourite was the little bowl of Indian spiced pasta with minced lamb that he bought for us. I could have easily eaten 4 of them. 9 o'clock came sooner than I had expected, and I realised with a jolt that I was going to be late to meet Jasper. I jumped up with a start, and found I was excited at the thought of visiting Club Nocturne to track down our murder suspect, Lily's mystery man. After borrowing a handful of outfits from Allegra's wardrobe, I went downstairs to say goodbye to Mum and Granny. Mum gave me another cuddle. Granny frowned at me as if displeased, but deigned to give me a pat on the cheek. "Those Hardwicks must be furious that you've inherited the castle," she said. "It's not above Lavinia Hardwick to try and frame you for that murder. You had better be careful out there all alone, my girl." Hi, you've reached the end. Comment the code words, "But he did it. It had to be him," to confuse everyone who hasn't reached this part of the story yet. Thanks for playing along.